On this, the 4th of July, I like to think back to the good old days when we liberated ourselves from the oppressive clutches of Hyper Beam not recharging if it KO'd a Pokemon. And sometimes I wonder, almost Wolfenstein style, what if Hyper Beam had never had that mechanic changed? It would be a lot more chaotic, for sure. So I know I tend to err on the side of, more power creep is generally not good. But I think it would be an interesting change. And the reason is that I like the way RBY Hyper Beam is implemented because it promotes a kind of player skill, which is what you want. You don't want super easy to spam moves that just kind of let you split the skill difference between two players in a battle. You want the stuff that promotes a greater use of tactics. It's more intricate, more nuanced, all that stuff. And, the Hyper Beam risk-reward is significant on both sides. It's not a move you can just toss around freely. And if you do, then you'll be punished for it. So I like that dynamic a lot. And I like it especially in the context of RBY, where the power level is generally not that high. So, which is a good thing in general, I think, but you do have the option to, raise the damage you're doing. You just have to, be careful about it. That's a kind of good type of skill dynamic to have in a metagame, I think. So in Gen 2, you introduce, I'm not going to say, power creep, because Gen 2 is famously, okay, I'll say stally, because I know this is a stereotypical perception of GSC, and it actually is not like that so much. It's actually very offense-dominated right now, to the point where I made a video about it, if you want to go check that out. If you're like, oh, wait, what? GSC? Offensive? That sounds impossible. I better... But yeah, GSC is very famously bulky. It's got the maxed out EVs everywhere. Everything's got leftovers. Sleep talk calls rest, so everything's got longevity. Everything's taking hits. There's only one layer of spikes, stuff like that. But there is a lot of offensive power. But it is true that even the offensive Pokemon in GSC are not instantly threatening to KOs on things. Or, barring exceptions like Zapdos against Skarmory. That's not the case for most Pokemon. So you don't have things like that. It's offensive pressure that keeps coming over a series of multiple turns, as opposed to, well, this thing is in now and it's going to destroy everything. So my wariness is always that of giving more offensive tools to a playstyle which is already generally dominant. Because, it's not like defensive teams are going to use Hyper Beam at all. I'm sure they could find some use for it if I want to be pedantic. But, of course, the risk-reward is, significant. But it's easier to spam Hyper Beam against defensive teams because they're not threatening to KO you back as much. Because they're not running such powerful Pokemon, generally. The strongest Pokemon on a defensive team is going to be, obviously, Snorlax, but then also one of the legendary electrics. Should be Zapdos. But, depending on what you use, if you're smart about it, then you can avoid, potentially getting taken out by a Hyper Beam misfire into Zapdos. But, then again, that means you have to be smart about it. You can't just spam it. My wariness comes more from the fact that Snorlax is already the best Pokemon in the game, even in Ubers, and giving it another amazing tool kind of scares me a little. Not so much in dealing with its checks, but because if you're checking Snorlax, you're generally already having to deal with normal stab. But more in the sense that it makes things like Snorlax Wars nasty, or, potentially more volatile, I guess. And also in the way that it just threatens everything else even more. I don't know that it would be a significant gap between, where Snorlax stands now and where it would without this, but I do know that I don't think Snorlax needs any more help. I mean, maybe I'm not looking at the other side of the coin fairly enough, because this would also give Pokemon a better tool to potentially deal with Snorlax. Problem is that Hyper Beam in Gen 2 is still a physical move because it's normal type, and that's the way the physical special split works, for those who don't know. And if you're a physical attacker, then Snorlax already doesn't like dealing with you to begin with. So, I don't know. I think the best Hyper Beam users in Gen 2 would be something like, I guess you could slap it on Machamp, just to have that, yeah, I don't know. But the other thing about Hyper Beam that makes me think maybe it's not such a huge upheaval is the fact that it's also going to be really hard to fit into your moveset. Because normal coverage is not great. There's a greater emphasis on hitting things super effectively in Gen 2. And if you're not stabbed and you're not hitting things super effectively, then fitting it into your moveset is going to be on the awkward side. I mean, it does have great neutral coverage, which is why I like it on Machamp, especially because the things that resist normal generally don't love dealing with Champ because of Cross Chop, and, Rock Slide or EQ for Ghost. But then again, you have to choose between, I guess Hyper Beam does hit all of Nidoking and Exeggutor, and it hits Zapdos. Well, it hits Zapdos just as hard, but it means, as Rock Slide, but it doesn't, it means that Zapdos can't pivot in, which is nice. I think it'd be an interesting choice. But yeah, it's probably not as overwhelming as I initially thought. So I think it would be an interesting double-edged sword. It would be a, yeah, I don't know. I think it would be nice for extra dynamism. I don't know if it would be broken. Like, I kind of doubt that it would be a case where, suddenly people are clamoring to ban it. But I also am skeptical of it making the game better. Although, funnily enough, one of the Pokemon that already does use Hyper Beam, even in its neutered guise in Gen 2, is Belly Drum Charizard, which can use it to wipe out things like Suicune and Vaporeon and Snorlax that it otherwise wouldn't. And taking these Pokemon out is such a big deal that, it's worth the forced recharge. But without the recharge, then you would definitely have Drumzard be a lot better, and, I like that. So, yeah. Okay, so that would be Gen 2. So Gen 3 is obviously different because you don't just have Hyper Beam. I mean, sometimes people say, oh, I'm going to use DD Hyper Beam Tyranitar, which is an extension of DD Double Edge Tyranitar, which is good against Swampert, Claydol, Flygon, all its ground type nemesis, and bulky waters, because Double Edge already hits them harder than Rock Slide. So they sometimes go with that, but that I think would be also, Gen 3 is when the power jump starts being a lot more significant because you have stronger Pokemon in general, more boosting moves, and more passive damage flying around. So in general, stuff gets hit harder or worn down more quickly, or however you want to describe it. Stuff is taking more damage in all manner of ways. So this is where I start getting wary, because being able to break through so many Pokemon so easily after that DD, where you're not just stronger, but you're also faster than things, that starts getting scary. Gyarados gets a huge buff with that. Because, Gyarados sometimes also likes to run Double Edge, but, the recoil sucks, and, now it's much stronger and no recoil, and yeah, that's huge. Suddenly you're dropping Zapdos and Blissey, and yeah, I mean, of course, there are more than enough normal resists in Advanced OU, and with the higher power creep, then it's also easier to punish misfired Hyper Beam. You Hyper Beam into a T-Tar, or Metagross, or Jirachi, then actually you don't mind Hyper Beaming into Gengar because the move doesn't go off, so you don't have to recharge. But or Skarm. Yeah, you don't want that to happen. So the risk reward is high, and I like that. And sometimes people, myself included, do complain that offense isn't good enough in Advance. Well, I don't know if this would make it better, but it would make it, it wouldn't make it better in the sense of being more consistent, but at least it would give you a tool which you can use, and that is really good. Because a lot of the time the options just seem so barren and not good. But I think it'd be interesting. DD's Salamence, is ingesting on my freedom a little there. DD Salamence, I mean, again, the coverage problem is there because you want HP Flying, you want Earthquake, and then if you don't run Rock Slide, then you get walled by dumb stuff like Aerodactyl. But, hey, Hyper Beam would hit it harder than HP Flying, so, you know, and people already do sometimes run Rock Slide-less DD Menses. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Mence would be really scary because unlike T-Tar, you can't outspeed it with anything after a DD, and it hits the hardest of all the DDers, and especially because it can freely run Adamant, and you are just plowing through, you know, Swampert, Blissey. Yeah, that would be scary. I don't know that it would be too much to deal with, but because the dynamics of dealing with it don't change that much, but you know, it'd be something for sure. So, I mean, yeah, what a way to summarize it. It'd be something. Of course it'd be something. I think the general lean more towards offense. I don't know if it would lean more towards offense because Sand and Spikes and, you know, healing and defensive play are still going to be king in Gen 3 because of how overwhelmingly powerful they are. But I appreciate that it would boost the offensive options more. What would also be big is that it's not just Hyper Beam anymore. It's Frenzy Plant, Blast Burn, and Hydro Cannon. And that is interesting to think about. I think the most common ones you'd see for sure are Hydro Cannon Swampert on its Endeavor Salic Berry set. Because sometimes it needs, you know, the extra power of Hydro Pump, but it doesn't want to miss with Surf. And the Hydro Cannon can miss, but, you know, 90 is way better than 80. And it just likes the extra power because it's going to be Torrent boosted. So you would have a much easier time blasting through stuff like Metagross and Jirachi. So, yeah, Hydro Cannon would be very common there. I don't know that the grass types would really use Frenzy Plant much. Like, Venusaur is a cool Pokemon, but it's not really the hang out at low health kind of Pokemon. It would be more, you know, Sceptile, if anything, with, like, Subseed. But even then, tough to fit into your move slot. Or to your moveset. Blast Burn Charizard is already, you know, a favorite of mine. It's on the rarer side for good reason, but it's so hilariously strong that with Sun and Pataya Berry and Blaze that you're like deleting Blissey and Milotic and crazy stuff like that, or you have a chance to at least. But without the recharge, then it's like, of course that becomes a much better option. Just, you know, slamming everything with Fire type power. Absolutely go for that. So, that would be, yeah, I think Dragon Dance Hyper Beam stuff. Choice Band, now that's a good risk-reward thing, because Gen 3 also introduces Choice Band, and CB is already very risk-reward, especially with the lack of true spammability of each of the moves. Like, even the strongest CB moves in Gen 3 are not exactly, you know, deleting the entire tier or close to it. So, and then you add Hyper Beam onto another level of risk, so I think that would be a level of nuance in exchange for the higher power that I would appreciate. So, yeah, I dig that as an option. And, you know, the fact that Blast Burn Charizard would be used just, you know, makes me very happy. So, yeah, I really don't see Frenzy. I don't see the other water starters using Hydro Cannon either. And, yes, and... Well, actually, no, Blaziken could use Blast Burn pretty decently. It also likes to hang out in Blaze range a lot. And the extra strength is, of course, massively appreciated against things like Zapdos. So, yeah, I could get behind that for sure. I think it would be balanced in Gen 3. It's like a lot of things that you'd want to introduce. The first 3 gens generally has a good balance. And then once Gen 4 rolls around and starts introducing, you know, Specs and Life Orb and Scarf, and higher base power moves and stronger Pokemon and all that. You know, that was a big shift. Oh, and the physical special split, of course, because now you're no longer limited if you want to use Hyper Beam, but on the special side, because Hyper Beam is special, and physical Pokemon don't lose out either because there's Giga Impact. And the Frenzy Plant, Blast Burn, Hydro Cannon trio don't really lose out because they were always special. But yeah, there's some very rare cases of, you know, people going, well, Staraptor's last move is rarely clicked, I'm just going to throw Giga Impact on it. and it's kind of cool on Choice Band, but it's not anywhere near consistent. And without that recharge, then it becomes, I mean, Porygon Z, its biggest issue is, well, it has a lot of issues, but the lack of good normal stab. And when Gen 4 came out, people were freaking out like, oh my god, it's a special attacker that Oko's Blissey with Nasty Plot, Life Orb, Adaptability, Hyper Beam. And people were running Calm Blissey to not die to it. But, it eventually didn't go anywhere. Because people were like, yeah, but that you also have to recharge, and against games that aren't against super slow stall teams, whose only answer is going to be Blissey, then you're going to be useless. So Porygon Z didn't go anywhere, except UU for a brief time, which was hilarious because it was broken. But if you give it a Hyper Beam that doesn't recharge upon a KO, suddenly Specs PZ is a lot scarier. I don't think there's any sense in using anything other than Specs, which, of course, balances it nicely. Because, you can check it with things like Protect and Substitute, that's the other one. And it's still not going to be that fast. It has no resistances. Ghost. It's going to make great use of that. I mean, maybe it would, but it's not common enough to make up for how much it's lacking in every other department. It will just collapse against most things. But it has that. It's high risk, high reward because, yes, it's collapsing against most things, but Specs, Adaptability, Hyper Beam, now that is a delete button. If there ever was one. And, I mean, it could potentially go horribly wrong, of course, more than most choice moves go, because of the forced recharge if you get it wrong, because that can give the opponent, a free Dragon Dance or whatever. But, most Pokemon are, I mean, you can build your team in a way that can account for boosters, and most of the time, if you're setting up on PZ, then it would be after it's KO'd something with Hyper Beam. And with this mechanic change, then you don't have that anymore. So, I think it'd be... I'm trying to not say interesting again. I don't think it would be consistent, especially, because it's not going to UU. Absolutely not. And it's not going to do much in, the Jirachi, Tyranitar, Heatran infested OU. But, maybe. And maybe you ditch the Specs. Maybe you could just go all out attacking with Life Orb. Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, Hidden Power, Fighting, or Ground. Probably Ground for Jirachi. And then Hyper Beam and just see what happens. Not the if you're being a serious Steve, then maybe not. But the Blast Burn stuff I think is very cool on something like Infernape, which, sometimes is plagued by power issues. It's lower... special attacking stats as the game gets bulkier and bulkier, or as the metagame grew bulkier and bulkier. But with Blast Burn, then you don't have, especially with Blaze, then you don't have dumb stuff like Jirachi surviving your attack. You don't need to make that horrible choice between the power of Life Orb and the complete lack of survivability of Life Orb, and the lack of power that comes with Expert Belt or Leftovers or whatever. So yeah, Infernape is much improved by this, of course. I don't think the other fire starters, yeah. I mean, I think Frenzy Plant is special, so Torterra wouldn't use it much in UU, sadly. Spec Sceptile in UU, though, that sounds great. Hydro Cannon, Spec Swampert, actually, is a very decent Pokemon, and I think giving it Hydro Cannon gives it yet another thing that differentiates it from its Specs Water-type competition, which it already has quite a few things, which has given it its niche to begin with, because it's it's weaker than other Specs Water types, but it's got a lot going for it that makes up for that. And with Hydro Cannon, then you just add to that list, which I think is really good. So I think Specs Hydro Cannon Swampert would be very interesting, and keep saying interesting. And the reason I keep saying interesting is because it gives you a lot of options. It's not just a blend, interesting. It gives you a lot of options to think about. And that's a lot of what being good at Pokemon is, or, being engaged by Pokemon as well. Lots of viable options to think about. Because, obviously there's, near infinite options if you don't care about it being good. But if you're trying to be competitive, then that's where the joy comes from, figuring out something that is unique and good, and putting together the options in on a previously unexpected way, because so many of the standards nowadays were, did not exist for a long time, and when they first came out, we were like, that's a gimmick, that's never going to last. Saw that way too many times. So that's my little segue on being interesting. So yeah, I don't think the other water star. Oh no, Empoleon. How did I forget Empoleon? Empoleon can use it on Sub Bataya to fantastic effect, absolutely destroying even resists. And I think Specs Empoleon is great as is, and this would be wonderful on it. So yeah, definitely a great option there. So yeah, and I don't really see I think those are the other ones. And the last Hyper Beam equivalent that exists in Gen 5 is Rock Wrecker, given to Rhyperior, and it is awesome. I mean, look, it's not the easiest to fit into a move slot, depending on what you want Rhyperior to do, because it has a lot of good moves, but it's not like those are really necessary, and you can just go, crazy with sheer power. I think Stone Cold, Legendary Dave, he likes to run CB Rhyperior with Rock Wrecker just because it's awesome, in his words. And it does kind of destroy everything with sheer power, because Rhyperior has an insane attack stat and choice band, and I mean, yeah, that would be one way to use it for sure, because you're not swords dancing with it, not with that speed. And if you're running a non-CB set, then you have a lot of other moves you want to be getting in there. But yeah, Banded Rock Wrecker Rhyperior. Talk about improving its stature in UU. I mean, it'd still be difficult to make the most of, but just because, it's Rhyperior, so slow, lots of exploitable weaknesses, all that stuff. But Rhyperior is also a very, very underappreciated Pokemon in OU, so I think it would be very cool to see it threatening to just rip Skarmory apart with Banded Rock Wrecker. That would be great. So I'm all for anything that improves Rhyperior. So maybe, and the more I think about it, the more all these Hyper Beam clones getting better and better. I mean, even in Gen 4, I still don't see them really as broken, just because the starter ones are specific. They're not going to be overwhelming. And Rock Wrecker, same deal. And Hyper Beam, Giga Impact, more widespread for sure. And you could definitely see something like a DD Giga Impact T-Tar being a little annoying. But at the same time, actually no, DD Giga Impact T-Tar would be good. I mean, the coverage against both Waters and Breloom, that's really good. Smacking Swampert and Breloom, and you hit Gliscor harder than Crunch, and just as hard as Stone Edge, while maintaining that coverage on Swampert and Hippowdon. Yeah, and hitting it just as hard as Ice Punch. You got all this coverage for all these. I mean, but then that's the thing, that it can also very easily go wrong, because normal coverage is just not something you want to be spamming. It's very punishable. So I think in Gen 4 it's still in a good spot, a balanced spot, just because the downsides are so huge that they're fair enough. Now in Gen 5, I guess it's actually kind of the same. Because, I guess Hyper Beam Keldeo would actually be really, as if Keldeo needed more help being stupid. But yeah, because you just blast through Lotties really easily, like Waters as well. Not Jellicent, obviously. But, like, a Pokemon like Keldeo, because it really only needs its 2 stabs, and then you can kind of, mix and match whatever you want. Oh, it blasts through, a Mungus and Celebi as well. It's like Calm Mind or Specs Hyper Beam Keldeo. I mean, probably Calm Mind, because you don't want to be locked into Hyper Beam. It's like, oh look, I'm countered by Heatran. But then again, that's not really so different from being locked into HP Grass or something with Specs. You just have to be more careful about spamming it, because if you Hyper Beam into Heatran, then it's nasty. But unchoiced Keldeo is kind of dangerous in general. So many people just bank on it being choiced and then just get completely dissected once it can switch moves. Kind of baffling how many teams are totally okay with being ripped apart by standard Keldeo that can switch moves. Anyway, that little tidbit aside, I think it's still more or less fine. Yeah, Keldeo gets dumb, but I think, again, normal coverage is not that good. Now, the starters, I'm not so sure on. I mean, I don't think it's really going to change much, I guess, because, yeah, like, the starters are not really very common in Gen 5 OU, unless I'm blanking horribly, but I don't think so, because Blaziken got banned. You know, and the Gen 4 and 3 ones are also... Yeah, I mean... And for Alligator, which you can occasionally see, that wouldn't use Hydro Cannon because it's special. So... Yeah, I think it would be... And Venusaur doesn't get you... Well, Chlorophyll Venusaur with Frenzy Plant would have been horrifying, but since that's not around, then yeah, that's not really a problem. Yeah, I think that would be... So the starter special moves, and I mean, Rhyperior is nowhere to be seen. I don't think that's going to change either. I think it'd more be less... It's not going to be a consistency thing so much as a surprise thing. Because as soon as you start, regularly making Hyper Beam part of your strategy, then, it can be exploited more. But in, like, a one-off situation, especially in, like, a best-of-one environment, like Smogon Premier League, which reminds me I got to make my video about how best-of-one is an embarrassment, then you can catch someone off guard and get, big rewards for it. Much more than in the current state of... Hyper Beam having to give the recharge, which makes it, not seen. I mean, sometimes, yes, in like Gen 2 or 3 or something, but the rewards just aren't as big in the later gens, especially as other moves get stronger and stronger. That's a really big thing. Where before you needed Hyper Beam's extra power because your other options weren't as strong, but, in the land of like Draco Meteors and, rain-boosted Hydro Pumps, then... where you're really needing Hyper Beam from. So it'd be more like a bonus to toss on Keldeo and, completely upend whatever's in your way in that one battle. I mean, I'm sure you could get some sort of consistency of if you tried, but it wouldn't really be something that would become a metagame defining thing. So that's Gen 5. Gen 6... Gen 6 kind of changes things with fairies, with the way the type chart comes out. So I think it would kind of be... Like, what I'm thinking is, like, Tough Claws Mega Metagross with Giga Impact. And that sounds nasty. Or, like, Mega Pincers. Well, that one's hard to fit. But, Pinsir sometimes doesn't even need to SD. It just kills everything. And you start Giga Impacting, like, Rotom and, like, Zapdos. That's nasty. Yeah, I think that would be cool. Oh, Blast Burn, Mega Charizard, yeah, what could go wrong there? Okay, I think Gen 6 is officially the cutoff point where it starts getting a little on the silly side. Almost for that alone. But yeah, I think with Megas in the picture... Because a lot of... Actually, Gen 6 kind of experienced a little bit of a reverse power creep, with how moves like Surf and Flamethrower and Ice Beam and Thunderbolt had their base power lowered from 95 to 90. Hidden Power took a hit from 70 to 60. Draco Meteor went from 140 to 130. Hurricane went from 120 to 110, and so did Fire Blast and Thunder and Blizzard. And Hydro Pump. So yeah, if anything, then Gen 6 actually would kind of need it. Ish. Where just to have that extra power boost. But the flip side, of course, is that the Pokemon themselves are so much stronger. So yeah, I don't know. I think it'd be kind of cool. As to my knowledge, I've heard some tales of Nasty Plot, Hyper Beam, Tornadus T in Gen 8, and I don't know, it doesn't have Nasty Plot until Gen 8, but you would start seeing stuff like that more, I think, in Gen 6 and 7 for sure as well. I mean, Gen 7, you already see Hyper Beam and Giga Impact getting used sometimes because of Z moves. I mean, what is one of Kartana's most common sets? Z Normal, Giga Impact. Completely delete, Mega Latias, Tornadus T, Zapdos. So, and that's a high risk, high reward thing. But can you imagine if it didn't have to recharge if it KO'd something with regular Giga Impact? That would be disgusting. That'd be horrible. But I still don't know if it'd be too much Well, okay, it might not be too much, but it definitely would be unpleasantly more difficult to deal with than it already is. So, yeah, yeah. For Gen 6 though, like Blast Burn Mega Charge is just utterly obscene. You know, especially because you can't even use an immunity to stop it, because then it doesn't recharge. So, you know, forget Heatran helping play around that. And you can't really, what else is it that you can't really do? You can't really, you play around it with resist, because the resists, I mean, even if you just switch into a resist, you're going to take so much damage from it. Yeah, I mean, the power is not that much of an upgrade. Actually, no, now it is, because to my knowledge, I don't know actually if Hyper Beam got lowered from. No, I think it's still 150 in Gen 6 and later. So actually, now it's even bigger jump from Overheat. So yeah, Blast Burn RBY would be absolutely nuts, and the water. Hydro Cannon Greninja. I mean, I know it got banned in Gen 6, but can you imagine that in Gen 7? If it KOs... Yeah, especially on Ash Greninja, the Pokemon that already wants to KO something as badly as possible so it can transform into a Pokemon that would be Uber if it started the game in that form. Yeah, give that thing Hydro Cannon. Make it even easier. Yeah, that would be utterly insane. You'd see a lot more water immunities, not just resists. So I mean that's the level of power that starts making even Chansey think twice. You know, it's like, oh, I don't need to heal this hit off with Chansey right now because it takes so little from everything. So I'll set up Stealth Rock or use T-Wave, and then you come in later. Oh, I really should have used Soft Boileds because now I can't take this. Yeah, Gen 6 is starting to push it a little bit. Gen 7 is where you really start questioning, alright, I don't know if these moves are super healthy. Because the trade-off with Z moves is at least that after you use them, then, they're basically a dead slot in most cases. But now they're just regular moves. Well, I mean, not regular, obviously. They still have their drawback. But they don't always have that drawback. Because before... it'd be, oh, well, I'm going to sack something in Giga Impact, and then I take it out for free because there's nothing they can do about it. And now it's like, well, if I can't sacrifice anything with this Giga Impact, because if I do, then I don't take out the Kartana. But I can't really switch into the Giga Impact because it's so strong, great coverage coming from Kart, all that stuff. So yeah, I think, like even stuff like DD Mega Tyranitar with Giga Impact, again, splitting that difference on coverage and just going for raw sheer power, so you can't really out-resist it. I mean, there's still going to be ways to deal with it, obviously, but it's kind of crazy. So that's pretty much, yeah, I think in Gen 8, especially, like with so many things getting nasty plot, and like Spectrier, can you imagine? I know that got banned, but... like something, even like Ubers, I don't even want to imagine what that'd be like facing Calyrex and stuff. But yeah, I think once you get to Gen 6, then Hyper Beam playing like it did in RBY starts to get a little suspect, to say the least. And I'm sure that, this is just off the top of my head, I'm sure there's definitely a lot of applications you can come up with that make this thing absolutely insane. With very little effort, so you don't have to, and it would, cause some sort of, I wonder if it would make a Pokemon broken that otherwise wouldn't be. That is an interesting idea. But yeah, so that's pretty much everything I had to say on the subject. I wonder what you think and all that. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching/listening. And I will see you in the next one. We're just going to watch this Breloom beat this Flygon.